What's going on, guys? Welcome to Steve Does Stuff. I'm Steve, and today we're gonna be doing some more 1JZ Mustang stuff. To refresh, this is a 1989 Foxbody Mustang notchback. Got a 1JZ VVT-i motor in it. It was / still is running a Fueltech FT450 standalone, and it has a Collins adapter using a Z32 transmission from a Nissan 300ZX. So the last episode, I updated the friction surface on the Collins flywheel. I got a new M-Pact 6-puck sprung ceramic clutch, and I had some learnings on the pressure plate on this one, and ultimately ended up using a comp stage 5 pressure plate. So now it is time to move on to wiring, because even though we have a transmission, it's not going to work without any of this stuff hooked up to that stuff. Now, I'm no wiring guy. As a rule of thumb, electricity usually scares me, and I'm not a big fan of wires. A good friend of mine that I met through Rhett, Jason, is an absolute wizard. So in the background, when we pulled the harness out of this thing, he split it all apart, and there was some errors with the way that it was set up. The Coles notes of this, which I don't really understand, are the FT450 Fueltech system requires 2 grounds. It requires a physical ground and it requires a digital ground. My understanding is a digital ground is just reference voltage. And without it, things got screwy. We would get like TPS creep, the inputs would start going all over the place. It wasn't working very well. So Jason, being the madman he is, pulled this whole harness apart, rewired it. We've got outputs for fuel pump, thermal fans, we're wiring in pressure sensors for fuel and oil, all of which were never there. They were all manual switched. So he's gonna be here in a few days to help me kind of install this. But before I do that, I am taking the dash out of this thing because those holes offend me quite a lot, and this could use some work. Now, I recently picked up this minty dash. 25 years of Mustang, baby. Big hit with crowds. Probably about an hour away from my house for about $100, which is great. It has 0 holes in it, which is the main reason I bought it. So let's get started by tearing this piece out first, removing this stupid mount, and just kind of seeing where it goes. Here for the wideband. Sick mount. Okay, we got this guy out and off. That's an interesting job here. We'll come back to that in a minute. These look pretty straightforward. I'll label these defrost. So this is 4-way, this is defrost. This is lights, and none of the other things really do anything. So I'll get those labeled up, and then let's keep pulling this thing out of here. So our gauge cluster is out, and just gonna kind of start arbitrarily removing things. This fuse panel's got to stay behind. We got a couple screws over here. For the most part, the dash is semi-loose. There's screws on the side, so I'm basically just gonna go ape shit and undo a bunch of screws, label things that I think might be important, take some videos to remind myself along the way, and hopefully we'll have the dash fully out of this unit. This is no bueno. I don't like this. There she is, old versus new. Looks like he's cut out a bunch of area here, which we'll see why that happened. Still got a good dash pad on here, so I'll probably save that before I just basically, I don't know, throw this on Marketplace for like 10 bucks. I'll do probably a pad swap while this thing, or just take the pad off of it. But overall, these dashes match very nicely. I'll save what I can, sell what I won't. Holy smokes, do we got a mess behind the dash. Yikes a mundo. So as I sit here looking at this, I'm just trying to kind of process and take all this in and try and separate what is Fueltech, what is no longer needed Ford pieces, and where do they have to intersect. So say for instance, my turn signals. Are these turn signals? What do they do? I know they come off these wires, which go into this harness, which is the huge one in here. So these are all still necessary. These don't really offend me being up under the dash. I may just kind of zip tie them off out of the way. The real dog's breakfast is like everything that is like in and out of here. I want that all gone and cleaned up. This fuse block, while it is very nice, just doing that is not really helping me. Here's my wideband right here. So this is the wideband input from the actual sensor. Down here between my legs is the piece that goes to the ECU, or the Fueltech dash. So a lot of weird stuff going on around here. I'm just gonna try and focus on separating some of these and trying to make some sense out of it. Good God, there's a lot of space in here. Holy smokes, man. Like way in there. Also a lot of holes. Would imagine it's gonna be pretty breezy. May not be a horrible idea to strategize a solution. There of course is my transmission hole, which that's just gonna stay there. This is the dashboard piece. Not a huge fan of. It's kind of cool. It's got this, carbon fiber-y thing looking thing right here. But overall, I was a little disappointed with just basically how far forward the Fueltech sits. It sits proud of the dash. I like the carbon fiber kind of backer piece in here, but I would like to sink the Fueltech right into the back. So probably like drill and cut out the center section of it. And then I would love to have like the actual fuel gauges, maybe a boost gauge in here one day. So I'm gonna start kind of disassembling this and just see where I get to. As far as the rewiring goes, I am gonna stop before Jason shows up here because we're gonna make a mess. So I think it's important to take some chances and learn something, but it's also important not to f it up worse. So I'm gonna wait till the people who actually know what they're doing show up here and just kind of tackle some small projects along the way. Hooking up the engine harness, hooking up oil pressure sensor, running the harness back in, and then of course messing with that dash. So this is my new dash setup. Moved back the Fueltech so it's no longer at the very edge of the dash. Sitting in there nice and center. Got the fuel gauge here. Thinking on the left hand side of the Fueltech, eventually I'll put like an oil pressure and then possibly a boost gauge over there. This is probably the finished state. Pretty happy with it overall. Some definite hackery in here, but hey, it worked. All right, so now that our dash is more or less taken care of, time to put the harness back in, which has been thoroughly gone over by Jason. It was originally wired with no VVT-i sensor. There was some funky wiring for the TPS, and it didn't have a lot of output, so the ECU is capable of controlling your fuel pump, your fan, having oil pressure, all that good stuff. Unfortunately, none of this was integrated into the harness. It's been blasted apart, put back together, and my job is to run it back to the motor as well as poke it up back into there. So now I need to take this and kind of connect it. Let's get started. All right, today is the day. Hopefully we will hear the 1JZ Foxbody fire up again, but on a correct ECU harness with a lot of the inputs changed around. Jason's coming down here to help me out with this, and then hopefully it's time for an exhaust, probably a muffler, and a tune. But today is wiring day, so as soon as Jason gets here, we're gonna hit it, and we're gonna hit it hard. Once Jason arrived, we went to work tearing apart the center console of this car. If you remember, it had that weird carbon fiber panel on it, where there was a bunch of switches that controlled the Fueltech, they controlled the fans, and there was a bunch of relays and kills all integrated into that. So we spent the first part of our day chasing down wires, figuring out what did what, and once we had a good handle on that, we tore the whole panel out, split apart all the relays, stripped back the wires to try and reroute them where we needed them to go. Once we had a handle on that, we turned our attention to the Ford body harness, which is surprisingly still well intact. We started tearing into this because there is still a lot of switched 12-volt power, and we wanted to make the key turn on the fuel pump, turn on the Fueltech, and most importantly, turn off the Fueltech so the car will stop.
Guess what? We have a stable TPS.
Look at that.
Once we had the internal wiring sorted, we turned our attention to chasing down some electrical gremlins, such as the TPS. This one had been wired backwards previously, so we were trying to undo and assess the damage. Unfortunately, we got it working, but there were still lots of fun little things to figure out. Once we'd figured out the TPS issue, we turned our attention to the next electrical gremlin, which was a no spark on crank. This was a result of the Fueltech not being able to see RPM for whatever reason. the crank signal could not pick up RPM for more than half a second. It would see it and then it would disappear. We chased this all around, we checked the spark plugs, they were firing correctly on test, but on crank they would not fire, which meant the car wouldn't start. This ended up being a setting in the Fueltech which was done incorrectly on the previous tune due to the lack of grounds. Once we switched it to rising rate, it picked up RPM and the motor finally lit off for us.
And I'm just going to make sure that I actually have fuel in the fucking fuel table. Yeah.
So we got spark, we got crank signal, we got cam signal.
I'll check for that.
Okay. Steve, you want to get that thing?
Well, I'm not going to leave it to run off.
Okay. It's alive! Yesterday was a huge day with Jason here. We were able to accomplish some pretty serious milestones. So the harness is fully run, wired in, and is working correctly. This car is running and starting better than it ever has. So we got it reading both the crank and the cam signal. We have our VVT-i working. It is running smoothly. It is starting reliably. It's working better than it ever has. We were able to trace back some power in the body harness. So now the Fueltech turns on with the key, which is phenomenal. And this thing is just sounding super mean. Unfortunately, Jason could only be here one day this weekend, so I have been kind of left to clean up whatever is left. The good news is everything in here, or most of everything in here, can stay as is. Today, what I'm going to be doing is mostly kind of zip tying things, trying to place them in the right spot, putting the dash back in. Of course, taking all of the tape off of the engine harness because it is set and it is in place aside from a few zip ties, so there's no need to have blue tape everywhere. Jason did a really nice job just making sure everything was all zip tied nicely. Guy is an absolute weapon. So there's still a few things that need to be hooked up here. So this is oil and fuel pressure sensor. Didn't have the proper setup for it. Still need to mount the MAC valve over here. First things first, I'm gonna take some of the vanity plates off the motor, cut off all of the tags, and just kind of put the harness to bed and get ready to move on to other things. Under the hood is as done as it can be for now. I'm going to be mounting the MAC valve down in here so it's nice and close to the front of the turbo, out of the way of the potential intake that's going to be here. Vanity cover is back on. All of our tags are ripped off. The body harness, the original one, is zip tied down here with the Fueltech harness. Everything's in place that can be for now. Fun fact, this car's got line lock. Obviously, not really hooked up to anything, but under the hood is as done as it can be for now. So that means it's time to turn my attention to this disaster. So this is set up basically just to get it running, which it did. But now it is time to zip tie, move things, place things, and get the dash back in so it's actually set up and looking good. So while everything is pretty exciting down there, I want to make sure I retain all the functionality I had before. So mainly making sure all my lights work. I want to make sure hazards are working. I've moved this fuel gauge over to the dash, which these wires have been cut and spliced. And the Fueltech now is supposed to turn on with the key. Here I was thinking I was done with everything under the hood, but I forgot about these little guys. So right now, the two Mishimoto fans draw power from the alternator, has one 30 amp fuse, but they're kind of put together by these little fellows and they don't look the best. They're looking a little spicy. And this was the ground that was basically completing the circuit. And after running for about 5-10 minutes, this thing was smoking hot. So they draw a lot. So I'm gonna run 2 inline fuses, separate these, still draw power from the alternator, but separate wires for both, and then run 2 ground wires back in through that firewall. So the outside wiring continues. But it's not looking any better. It's a lot of stuff up off the floor. Zip tie the carpet back together. Everything's labeled and marked. I haven't wired in these relays, partially because I can't remember what Jason told me to do. Updated fan wires over there, and I could either wait and do the relays or put the dash back in right now. And I don't want to wait, so I'm gonna put the dash in, and I'm probably gonna regret it because I still need to finalize the position for the power kill and a few other things. So this could bite me in the ass, but I am gonna go ahead and do it anyway. So it is time to put the dashboard in this thing because I am sick of looking at this. Stresses me out. So the main dash is back in. The cluster is all hooked up. I just want to try and see if I have still retained all of my functionality despite all of my butchery of wiring. There it is. All right. Hey, I got 4 ways. I have lights. We got running lights, we got power. All right, looking good so far. Hey, freaking right. Okay, so we just gotta figure out why the fuel gauge isn't working now. This has been a mission. 3 days of really ripping on this thing, and we are getting very, very, very close. Kind of gave up on some of the wiring stuff yesterday and started fitting the center console together, which is looking super freaking nice. But this is the last day of the long weekend, and I need to kind of get back to my normal life, which is not working on cars every day, sadly. So my goal is to kind of button this thing up, put it down on the ground, and hopefully, maybe take it for a drive. Still unsure how that clutch is gonna work out, but I have made a new list to guide me through the day. So first of all, it's up in the air. I'm gonna do diff fluid. That's nice and easy. I got everything to do. Turn signals that are in there, I wanna get wired up. When I pulled the dash out, I found actual lights in there. So I'm gonna extend the wires, mount them into the cluster, and then just be done with that forever. Reinstall the cluster. I'm gonna try and figure out that fuel gauge, but if it's not working, I give up. I'll just move on. I'm gonna wire up a 12-volt Ford power port that came with the car. Basically just gonna rip off the cigarette lighter, wire that in there. It's 12-volt constant, so it's always gonna be on. I'm gonna finish placing and screwing down the center console. I'm gonna make a plate for the center to mount the AFR, mount the kill switch, and then mount a manual fan switch for now. I also have to mount and wire those relays. I got a decent sized list, probably not gonna get through all of it, but I gotta get going right now. Well, not exactly starting off with the W I wanted. Turns out there is no drain bolt on the rear cover of the diff, so I'd have to take the actual whole cover off, and I don't want to get into that. So we're gonna kind of ignore that on the list and start messing with those turn signals. All right, so I've extended the turn signal lights, and they have this little grommet the diode pushes through. I'm thinking placement on here, just kind of like here and here. So they're, you know, pretty low, easy to see, definitely in my face, so I don't leave them on. And gonna drill these holes, place them, and then crimp some pieces onto here, and then the grounds for the car so they'll work properly. Driver cluster with our lights in here, didn't quite space them. I wish this one was a little bit more over here, but they're in. They've been tied together. We've got new connectors on them, so they're easily disconnected. Dollars to donuts, I am definitely gonna put this thing backwards when I put it in, but it's time to bring it in, fit it up, and do one final test on all the gauges and lights, and then we're gonna screw this guy home. Gutter slut, let's go. And why don't you want to go in? That's your home, man. What the heck? Oh, there you go. At this point, I am unconcerned with those types of things. Now I got to figure out how to wire this gas gauge again. So I finally figured out what was going on with the fuel gauge. There was a loose post on there that I had to crank back down, and it worked. So we have a working fuel gauge. We have a working Fueltech that's switched. We have low beam. We got the high beams. We got left turn signals. I can't believe I wired these correctly. We got right turn signals. And we got the 4 ways. Oh, Finally, I can put this thing back into the dash. This is so good. Looking good. I couldn't figure out the vanity plate down here. I don't know if the wires are in the incorrect spot, but driver's seat is done. Now it's time to move on to some of that center wiring. The center console is back out because we're doing the final fit up. I'm gonna cut down this little carbon fiber piece that was in the middle to fit this area. I'm gonna put the kill on the left-hand side, the AFR on the right, and then that'll basically be that for the center console. I'll run the power port out over into there. We'll bolt it up, and this will have like basically a full interior. So have my little CAD template right here, cardboard dated design. Cut this off, kill, AFR. After a month and a half on the stands, all the wiring out of it, transmission in and out twice, 2 different pressure plates, I am happy to say that this thing is finally running well, starting well. I think it's ready for a test drive. Against my better judgment, this is going to be the inaugural test drive. I finally get to drive the car that I bought 3 months ago. Here goes nothing. First test drive was an actual success. I cannot believe it. It's also the first time that I have ever really driven the 1JZ Mustang anywhere. I've cruised it around the neighborhood. It's great. I can't lean on it because the tune is, very basic and I'll probably blow it up. But a lot of wins here. The clutch works, amazing. It didn't fall apart, always a nice sign. It's running and idling perfectly, never stalled, never did anything weird. And of course, it sounds amazing. So interior still needs a little bit of work as well as the ECU outputs. But that is a running and driving 1JZ Foxbody Mustang, and I am absolutely itching to drive this thing in anger. That's gonna do it for this episode of Steve Does Stuff. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.